Your final candidate is the founder of Farallon Capital and One California Bank. He's been a partner of the executive committee at Hellman and Friedman for 33 years and served on the board of trustees at Stanford University for 10 years. He's the philanthropist and founder of Next Gen America, a nonprofit that promotes environmentalism and works to combat climate change through politics. Please welcome Tom Steyer.
You guys, so I understand that this is question and answer, which I much prefer anyway. So I thought I'd just spend 2 minutes to try and tell you a little bit about who I am. I did start something called Next Gen America, which is an organization that we started at the beginning of 2013, which basically tries to engage young people in politics. We are on 41 college campuses in the state of Iowa. And in 2018, we were organized by congressional district. So we were in 38 Republican congressional districts, and we were organizing people between the ages of 18 and 35. We were on 420 college campuses. The turnout for young people in those ages more than doubled from 4 years before. So it went from 18% turnout in 2014 to 41% turnout in 2018. Your generation, the young generation, is the biggest generation in American history, bigger than the baby boomers. You're the most diverse generation in American history and the most progressive. On those 38 congressional districts, 33 went Democratic. That includes Abby Finkenauer and Cindy Axne. So what we can really see, what I was trying to do, and what I believe in is that your generation is the key to American politics. That in fact, the young people, if they show up, will change America dramatically and forever. And if you know anything about me, the issue that I've been most associated with for the last 10 years is climate. I've been working to organize people around climate, to put together coalitions of American citizens to take on corporate power, a lot of it about climate, and we've been winning. In a lot of the Western states, including California, where I'm from, you can put something on the ballot, and if the people vote for it, it becomes law, a proposition. I've done that a number of times against oil companies and tobacco companies and utilities, and we've won almost every single time. So when I think about being here with high school students in Des Moines, Iowa, what I'm telling you is I'm committed to this issue. I'm committed to the turnout and participation of you and your generation. And I believe that we have the ability to solve this problem and do it in a way that will make us healthier in terms of clean air and clean water, richer in terms of more jobs and better paid jobs, and take us back to what the United States is supposed to be about, which is standing up for the most important values, doing the right thing, and leading the world. That's what America was at its inception. That's what we've historically done in the world. That's what this administration has walked away from, and that's what I believe in. So I very much look forward to answering your questions, but I wanted to give you a little sense of what I've been doing for the last 10 years.
Thank you, Mr. Steyer. Please feel free to take a seat. Please feel free to take a seat. I'm going to start off with the same question that every candidate has received today. When registering to attend this event, almost 57% of students reported that they'd be eligible to vote in the 2020 election, yet only 44% said that they plan to. If you win the Democratic nomination, what will you do to engage America's youth and increase their voter participation?
So, to be fair, I have been doing that I think the organization I started, Next Gen America, is the largest organization to promote registration, engagement, and participation by people under the age of 30. And we do it as I was saying, your generation was voting at half the rate of other American citizens. And we have asked, and I personally have asked, our organization has asked hundreds of thousands of people under the age of 35, and I've asked dozens why they don't vote. It's actually the way we start a conversation, and people always say the same thing. No one tells the truth. No one deals with the issues that really matter in my life. There's no difference between the parties. Why would I participate in a failed system? And that's the opening statement to a conversation where we're trying to make the point that actually there's a gigantic difference between the parties, that your generation holds the key to actually having a successful America and a hopeful, positive future, and therefore your participation is of utmost importance.
Your first question from the audience will come from Vera Snodgrass. She's a student at North High School here in Des Moines.
How would you plan to handle school safety if you were elected president?
So I know that young people today are growing up in an atmosphere where they are constantly aware of the possibility of a mass shooting. And let me say that that is a change in American society that didn't exist when I was growing up. I never, ever worried about it one time. So I can say the basic things that I believe in. I mean, I believe in mandatory background checks for every gun purchase. I believe in banning assault weapons. I believe in banning high-capacity magazines. But I think you have to go beyond that when we're talking about the violence in our society, not just the mass shootings, but also the shootings that go on every day, and the suicides. And they're all highly correlated with the number of guns that exist per capita. And we know that because you can look around and see where there aren't a lot of guns, there aren't a lot of any of those incidents of killings. So I would also do voluntary buybacks of guns to reduce the number of guns in societies. And I think I would do everything I can in the context of the school to make it safe, but I would never go near the Republican idea of arming teachers, which I consider to be one of the worst ideas I've ever heard.
Do you think that voluntary buybacks would really make a dent in the number of mass shootings? One question that we asked Senator Michael Bennet earlier was, why would a would-be shooter turn in his or her gun? And we talked about the example of Adam Lanza, the Sandy Hook shooter. These were guns that were not newly bought, so why would a shooter like him turn in his or her gun?
I take your point, and it's a good point, but I think that we have to look at a little broader context, Fez, which is I think we also have to look at the number of suicides and killings. So in fact, I think that for the people who are the truly disturbed people who should never have a gun in the first place, I think you make a good point, but I think that the number of guns per capita give people the ability to act on their impulse in a way they otherwise wouldn't. And those aren't people who've been planning to do this and who aren't truly demented. Those are people who can act on an impulse that's a huge mistake, change their life, maybe change somebody else's life, and that's the kind of thing where I think there'd be more impact.
Sure. Your next question is going to come from Kyle Weston. He's a student here at Roosevelt High School.
As a student who wants to go to meteorology, I'm concerned that candidates are solely focused on preventing climate change rather than mitigating its effects right now. What will you do to mitigate the current effects?
So let me just ask you a question, Kyle. When you say mitigating in terms of how are we going to deal with the floods, how are we going to deal with the fires, how are we going to deal with the storms? Okay, we're clearly at a place where we have to deal with the impacts of what's happening. And I think any policy has to include the idea that we are already in a heightened period of environmental problems, episodes. And so when I think about what's going on in Iowa, I think it's really important to take into account not just the floods and to be prepared for them in the sense that we know they're more likely, we know that they're going to be more extreme. So we have to prepare beforehand and then we have to go in and help when the time comes. But I think the other thing that's going to be true in terms of mitigating environmental effects is I want the climate program to deal also with the traditional issues about clean air and clean water. When I think about Iowa, I also think about pollution in the water supply. I think about nitrate runoff, and I think about the health impacts in our water, in your water supply, and what it means to people to get cancer from things that are running out of either agriculture or, chemical processes. So the way that I would actually deal with this, and the way that I think a responsible climate program, which is one that I hope I'm putting forward, should do, is to make sure that you're talking directly to the communities before you come up with the policy. Because one of the things that my program does, and I've done this for 10 years, is that we've led with what I call environmental justice, but what it really means is grassroots inclusion and leadership, so that you're actually going to the people in Iowa to ask them, what are your issues and how does this policy affect them, and what is the policy that would actually do it better, to make sure that we're directing money to the communities that are particularly polluted. So that in fact, my experience in doing environmental policy for over 10 years is that if you start with the communities and the immediate pollution problems, you actually get a better policy overall, including how you deal with climate, and you have a much more thoughtful, human-based program. And I think having that at the center and having those people in leadership positions is critical.
Your next question is going to come from Robert Wagner. He's also a student here at Roosevelt High School.
The ongoing trade war poses difficult economic problems, especially for Iowan farmers and those in agriculture. What are your plans for dealing with this situation?
So, I don't know if you guys know this, but I started my own business. I started my own business in one room, no windows, no employees, and I built a multi-billion-dollar international business. So I feel as if I've had decades of experience of understanding what drives a prosperous country, what drives a fair country economically, what makes people succeed, communities succeed, Iowa succeed. The trade war is a failure, straight up. It's a mistake. It's a mistake that the president doesn't know how to get out of. The first day of my presidency, I would end the trade war. So I have a very simple answer. You have a mistake, it's dumb, it's not working, it's hurting Iowans to the tune of $2,500 per year for a family of 4. It's not working, it was ill thought out, it's stupid, it's wrong, cut it out. We do have to deal with people around the world, but this is an incredibly dumb, destructive way to do it. And I don't know who came up with the idea, but they shouldn't be hired.
Next, we'll be hearing from Nick Edgar. He's a student at Valley High School.
My name is Nick Edgar, and I'm the owner of a small business in West Des Moines. As a small business owner, what new taxes can I expect from you, a fellow businessman?
So, obviously, I spent decades in business, and when I think about business, I think about it as being exactly what you're saying, an entrepreneurial, creative place that drives American prosperity. So what you can expect from me is support, particularly from small business and particularly in terms of finance. My wife and I started a community bank to support small businesses in California. It's dedicated to the ideas of economic justice, environmental sustainability, women and minority-owned businesses. So what I will promise small businesses is I will make sure that the financial system supports you in a way that you can grow, and I will make sure that that money is available to minority businesses and women-owned businesses. Because I believe in business being the engine of American prosperity. I don't believe in businesses being allowed to write the rules for America and determine the laws under which they work. So I describe myself as a democratic capitalist. I am very upset about the idea that the businesses have bought the government, but I know for a fact that if we're going to grow, if we're going to create jobs, that they're going to be the engine. I just want to make sure they do it in a way that is fair to the American people and that the money is shared equitably so that when we grow together.
So going specifically to the question, what specific taxes would you present under your own plan?
Well, I don't think of this as just a tax question, Fez. When you think about business, I mean, the real question is, a tax question is, how much do you keep? I'm more interested in, how much do you make? And so from my standpoint, when I look at small businesses, the things that really hold them down is access to capital. If you have a good enough idea, if you're good enough at your job and you want to grow, the question is, how are you going to get the capital to do it? I believe our banking system is shockingly unfair, really. And I believe I would do everything I could to promote and support community banks close to the area to make sure they know where to go and that they are encouraged to build small businesses in their communities. That's actually what I am. I am much more interested in successful business. I'm much less concerned with the idea of how much they keep, because honestly, if you look around the United States for the last 40 years, working people have gotten the shaft. It's just true. If you look, working people, when you take into account the cost of healthcare, rent, and education, haven't had a raise for 2 generations, and that's never happened before. That doesn't mean I'm not supportive of business, but it means we're not sharing the money equitably. I want to make sure that small businesses flourish, grow, create jobs, and people do well, but I also want to make sure that this society is fair to working people, and I won't give up on it.
And is this a part of your legislative agenda then, if you're elected?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Look, when you think about what success is, what drives success in a society, success is much more driven by how much capability, education the people in that society have. When you look at the countries that have done really well, they all obey the rule of law. They all support education, sometimes fanatically, and they actually support the idea of growth, but they also share it. Banana republics don't do well. They really don't. The places where all the money goes to the people at the top aren't sustainable. And we're definitely pushing into that territory. What we need to do is get back to the idea of America growing, being prosperous, and everybody moving up together.
Your next question is going to come from Neetu Yamanur. She's a student at the Maharishi School in Fairfield, drove 2 hours to be here.
Thank you.
Iowa is currently going through a mental health crisis with an insufficient number of mental health professionals to handle the population. What are your ideas on nationally increasing mental health funding and awareness?
So I have heard that, as I said, NextGen has been organizing here since the beginning of 14, and I've heard this as maybe the biggest issue in Iowa. That in fact, not just that they've been closing mental health facilities, but also the need for mental health care has grown substantially. And so to me, there's a couple of questions here. One is treating mental health with parity to other health issues, to accepting it as a straight up health issue and not putting it aside as somehow different and therefore treated in a less effective or less fulsome way. So one is about parity, and then the other is about how much money we have for healthcare and how expensive healthcare is. And so I have heard this about them closing mental health clinics at least for a couple of years. And I know that it's a huge issue in Iowa. And so to me, the question here is about money devoted to it. If you're going to treat it with parity, then it should have that. And secondly, I believe that healthcare is a right for every American. And this is part of it. So this is not an issue of, can I get it? The only question here is, what is the best way to get it? But it has to be available.
I'd like to bring in Ian Klein. He's a student at Drake University. Ian?
Hi, Mr. Steyer. Thank you for being here. My question for you regards child care policy. The average cost of infant care in Iowa is over $10,000 per year, which is higher than in-state tuition for public college. In addition, more than 40% of registered providers in Iowa have left in the past 5 years. What are your plans to reduce child care costs while increasing the accessibility and quality of providers?
Wow, that is a tough one. Because what you're really asking is, how can we have more of it at a lower cost? And the issue there is, what are the people who are providing that child care getting paid? And so when I see this, to me the question here is, I'd have to look and see. I doubt very much that the people who are providing child care in Iowa are being overpaid. To me, the question here is, what can the state do to help people who need this child care? Because it's particularly important for women who are juggling a young family and a career. And so to me, the question here is, What can the state do? What can the government do to support families so that they can actually have a two-career family without giving up all the money they're earning to take care of their young children? And I don't think the answer here is going to be cutting the wages of the people providing the care. I think the question here is, how is the state going to help those young people in terms of money? And let me say this at the outset. You know, I did start the Need to Impeach campaign. And what that meant was I did over 50 town halls in about 35 states, including what you would think of as bright red states, states that have a Republican governor and Republican majorities in both houses of the legislature. And what I saw in those states was that there was a very consistent playbook. Every single one of those states did the same things. And the first thing they did was cut taxes on corporations and rich people. The second thing they did was cut education spending. And the third thing they did was cut health spending. So really they're cutting the support, government support for families and young people and elderly people and seniors in their state. And this is a perfect example. This is a place where you have to ask yourself, what is the state's responsibility to help young people to make sure that women can continue? You know, women tend to be the primary caregiver. It's not fair, but I think statistically it's probably true, to make sure that they're supported in their careers and can continue in a way that their children can be safely taken care of and responsibly taken care of, and they can pursue their careers. And to me, that's really what we're talking about here.
Next, we're going to hear from Dr. Jessica Gogarty. She's the principal at Central Academy here in Des Moines.
Hello.
Nice to see you.
Another word for regulation is protection. To what degree should the federal government provide guidance to schools and universities investigating sexual misconduct cases under Title IX regulations?
So I think in the introduction, they said that I was on the board of Stanford University. And in colleges, as I found out being on the board of one, they spend an enormous amount of time dealing with the sexual interactions of people on campus and the inappropriateness, and it's a very murky area. But let me say this, I think it is appropriate for the government to come in with rules about behavior. And I think my experience is that actually providing guidelines of what's right here is something that is appropriate to apply to schools to make it easier for them. And I think that when you get it wrong, it has terrible ramifications. And when you get it right, I think it leads to a much healthier atmosphere on campus. And so I'm in favor. And I'll tell you a story. When I was in grad school, my brother is 1 year older than I am. I have 2 older brothers. And my brother started something called the Rape Education Project. And it was in 1982. And I said, Jim, what are you doing? And he goes, people don't understand what's going on. It's date rape. And it's important for people to start to understand this and to have guidelines and to make sure that, in fact, those guidelines are kept and that people are protected. And that's actually what I believe.
Now, we did receive some questions from students asking about immigration online. I want to bring up one that we got from somebody specifically discussing healthcare. As you know, 10 candidates raised their hands on the debate stage back in June when asked if they would provide free healthcare to undocumented immigrants. Would you do so as president?
So let me go back a step before I say yes, and that's this. We have a failed immigration policy. We have a policy where we have 11 to 13 million people living in our country. Some of them have been living here for 2 decades and more, and they have no documents. They work here, they pay taxes here, their kids go to school here, but they're effectively in the shadows. They have no legal, identity. Any responsible government would have solved this problem more than a decade ago. We can't do it. Our government is failing, it is unable to deal with the basic responsibilities of a government. So this question actually is, when you have a failed society, it's not a failed society, a failed government, how do you plug the holes in that boat? So instead of getting a boat that's seaworthy, we have a boat that's leaking all over the place, and instead of getting a new boat, the answer is, do you want to plug the hole? Because this question is really hard, particularly in the States where not every American citizen has health care. So it's one of those questions, there are a lot of implications that you haven't answered. So let me say, before I say anything about undocumented people in the United States, I believe every American citizen has an absolute right to health care. And so there is nobody in this country who's a citizen who I believe does not have a constitutional right in the 21st century to health care. So if you assume that, then the next question is, in this country with the government failing and unable to deal with 11 million people living here without papers, do you believe those people should have access to health care as well? Because I also believe that they should have a path to citizenship. So the answer to the question is, yeah, I do. But there are a lot of implications here about all the other things I believe that aren't asked specifically in that question. But the fact of the matter is, I believe every American has a right to health care. I believe that we need to have a comprehensive immigration reform, give people legal status, and a path to citizenship. And along that path, I believe they have a right to health care.
Now, I want you to think of your youth not too long ago. What early experience or lesson shaped you into the person you are today?
Okay, so let me say this. I don't know what you guys know about me, but I am a super lucky guy. I have 2 older brothers, and when I was growing up, I thought that I was normal because I knew exactly where I was going to go to bed at night. I knew that I was going to have a warm meal with my family. I knew that my mother was going to come in and say prayers with me before I went to bed and read me a story. And I thought that everyone in the United States had that. And it's not true. There are a lot of kids who don't know where they're going to put their head down, don't know if they're going to get a hot meal, don't know who's going to put them to bed, and maybe no one's going to read them a story or say prayers with them. So I've discovered how lucky I was, and my parents made sure I got a great education and really took care of me in a way that I'm very grateful for. So what happened to me that gave me a broader perspective than just what happened within my immediate family, which was very nurturing and positive? Believe it or not, the thing that gave me access to more parts of society and different people was sports. The 2 sports that I played most seriously in high school and college were basketball and soccer. And so I'm from New York. If you play basketball in New York and you travel around New York playing pickup basketball, which I did, you meet everybody in New York. And you spend time with them, and it's pretty intense. And if you play soccer, and you play pickup soccer, I don't think I played pickup soccer with 10 people who were actually born in the United States of America. Everybody was foreign born, and from every continent, because that's the world game. So for me, the thing that actually was the most educational in terms of learning about other people, spending real time, being really involved with people from completely different backgrounds, was basketball and soccer. And so actually, it's intense. I loved it. I mean, I wasn't doing it as a sociological experiment. I was doing it because I loved to play sports. But what it really meant was I was involved with people from every single part of the city and from every single background. And it really gave me a lot of confidence in going to different places and feeling comfortable with people, knowing that, as a matter of fact, we love doing exactly the same things, and we got the same pleasures and the same disappointments.
Thank you. Please feel free to have a couple minutes of closing remarks. You can have 2 more minutes of closing remarks.
So I think that there are 2 big challenges for the United States. One of them is we need to stabilize our climate. And I believe that I am if you take a look, I'm the most aggressive, most serious person about climate in this race. And you can look at my history and see that I actually have the most history of not only working on it, but succeeding on it, of passing things and making things happen. The second thing we need to do is our government, I believe, and I've spent 10 years thinking about it, has been bought by corporations, and it's completely broken. And we need to take it back. I mean, you should know all the things. 80% of American voters think corporations have bought our government, and I'm in the 80%. Literally think that the government does not serve the people, but serves corporations. If we meet those 2 challenges, though, if we stabilize the climate, and I'm dead serious about it, and if we take back the government from corporations, we are in the best position of any people in the history of the planet. All the things that Democrats are talking about, we can afford. Every one of them. We can afford healthcare as a right. We can afford the kind of academic experience from pre-K through college that everybody wants. We have the money to do that. We can afford a living wage. You guys aren't in the working world, but right now it's extremely inequitable in terms of how people get paid. And we can afford to have clean air and clean water in every part of the United States. No one has a right to poison you or your family so they can make more money. Period. So when I listen to these debates sometimes, I hear 2 things that I don't agree with. One is talking about a bunch of policies that until we take back the democracy, we can't get. But the other one is it sounds like we're just a series of failures. We are the most successful society in the history of this planet. We have a failed government. We're not a failed society. So if we take back our government, if we do those things, we have to call them out, we have to make them happen structurally, and then we're in a position where your generation will have the best guaranteed standard of living of any people in the history of the world. You guys can make this century not just another American century, but where we really actually do live the promise of America. Lead the world morally, intellectually, from a commercial standpoint, and from a research standpoint. That's what Americans have done. We're the technological leaders, but we're the moral leaders. And if you guys show out, we have to do it politically. We have to have this huge win, but if we do those 2 things, you guys will not only get a world that's better than the one that we got, you'll pass on a world to your kids that's better than the ones that you're gonna get. And that's the promise of America. We have to meet these 2 challenges, but guess what? All of your ancestors met those challenges. There is nothing that says Americans don't come through in the clutch. And so that is exactly where we are on this. In my opinion, the chips are totally down. So that's why we organize young people, because if you guys show up and the rest of American listen to the truth of where we really are, we can put ourselves in a better position than you guys understand. Better, more broad, more just, and that's what I'm asking you guys to do. Thank you. Good.